Hello people of YouTube! I'm Anna, aka Articulately Composed, and some of you may remember back in 2020, I did a video essay analyzing Alanis Morissette's new album, Such Pretty Forks in the Road. Since then, I've periodically gotten comments asking if I'd do the same to her earlier album, supposed Former Infatuation Junkie. And I adore that album. I'd love to do a review that does it justice. Only problem is, I have no idea how to tackle it. I could do a straight up song-by-song analysis like some of my other Why I Love X and You Should Too videos, but if I do that, I miss out on so much of the overarching weirdness. I could approach it from a scansion or text setting point of view, but that is so niche that no one would click on it in a million years. This all got me thinking, why is supposed Former Infatuation Junkie an album that's had me coming back over and over? From a songwriter's perspective, it's straight up bizarre at some points, but I've consistently loved it for over a decade. Then it hit me. It's a sandbox. Just as a warning, this video is going to attract two different types of people. Those of you here for the music analysis, and those of you here for the fandom analysis. If you're here to listen to me talk about supposed Former Infatuation Junkie, and you don't want to hear me go off about fandom culture, you should skip to this timestamp right here. Now with that out of the way, let's get started. When you hear the term sandbox, you're probably thinking sandbox game, something like Minecraft that has infinite playability. And you're on the right track. When I say sandbox, I'm talking about a piece of media that you want to play in far beyond the confines of the media itself. You're probably thinking, doesn't that describe any fandom? No, it does not. Most fandoms are nowhere near the level of sandbox. For example, the Super Hulock fandom was inescapable back in 2012. But genuinely, when was the last time you thought about BBC Sherlock? Not the fandom, not the friends you made along the way, but the show itself. Probably not for a while, right? I don't know how many of you are still on Tumblr, but I have not seen a single post about BBC Sherlock in the last several years that wasn't either about the fandom or making fun of the concept of Tumblr sexy men. Or let's look at an example that I was pretty deep in myself. I adored Steven Universe when it was running. It took up so much of my brain space. I spent so much time covering every single song in the show. I started this channel covering almost every single song in the show. I cried like 3 times when I watched the movie, but the second Steven Universe Future ended, it sorta faded from my consciousness. I don't dislike it now. I'm not one of those people who spends my time shitting on a children's show for problems caused by Cartoon Network's homophobia, but I just don't think about it very often anymore. I don't think I've gone back to rewatch it since it ended. So if a regular fandom hyperfixation isn't a sandbox, then what is? My theory is that to become a sandbox, a piece of media needs one of two things: impeccable world building or a fuck ton of plot holes. The best example of a world-building heavy sandbox that I can think of is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I just mentioned how I never see people on Tumblr talk about the contents of Super Hulock anymore. Well, 15 years after it ended, I still regularly see people talk about Avatar. I'll bet you anything, I'll go on Tumblr right now, and I'll find some kind of Atla fan analysis. And I don't even follow any Atla-focused blogs. The fandom had a major resurgence 3 years ago when it returned to Netflix. It's one of those shows that just lives rent-free in all our minds because it has so much depth. The world is fascinating and fleshed out. The characters feel like real people with real motivations. There's tons to play with if what you're drawn to is character, and tons to play with if what you're drawn to is lore. I mean, hell, there's an entire TTRPG based around the world of Atla because there's that much to play with. Another world-building sandbox would be the Lord of the Rings series. Now, I don't go here. I don't actually know that much about Lord of the Rings, but what I do know is it has insanely deep world building and it's managed to grasp literal generations of fans. It's the only piece of media I can think of that was written during World War II that still has an active fan base. The only older piece of media I can think of that has an active fan base is Sherlock Holmes. But with Sherlock, people tend to be fans of specific adaptations, not the Arthur Conan Doyle novels. Lord of the Rings fans are usually fans of the work written by J.R.R. Tolkien, because that work gave them enough of a sandbox to play in. Honestly, I don't have too many examples of sandboxes caused by excellent writing and deep lore because they're really hard to pull off. What isn't as hard, and is much more pervasive, is the sandbox created by not so great writing. I know what you're gonna say. How can something with worse writing create a longer lasting fandom? Okay, but hear me out. How else would Harry Potter have become such a cultural staple? Side note, I wrote the majority of the script before Hogwarts Legacy Blood Libel Simulator came out. I'll mention it a little later, but please just don't play it. It's not worth losing the trust of your trans and Jewish friends. And additional side note, I wrote that side note back when Hogwarts Legacy was like a hot button topic, which was months and months ago. I know it's not quite as relevant anymore, but still, please, just don't play it. As much as I hate to praise anything J.K. Turfling has done, Harry Potter is an excellent example of this second kind of sandbox fandom. The writing itself, not fantastic. It's a kid's book, it doesn't have to be fantastic. And when I say not fantastic, I'm not talking about the creepy slave race or the anti-Semitic bank goblins or the racist-ass names. I'm talking about the plot holes. Seriously, wizards canonically shit their pants and poof it away, yet bathrooms are a core plot point of the second book. You can do better than that, Turfy McTurfpants. But these holes are what open up the world for fans to dig around in. It might not be a complete world, but it's pretty vast, and if there's one thing fans love, it's filling in those plot holes. So many people have become attached to the world of Harry Potter. And I can't help but think the reason they're so attached isn't because they're in love with the canon world, but because they're in love with the much better world they've created in their heads. Seriously, Joanne the Transphobe hasn't created decent new content since 2007. There is no other reason why it's drilled itself so far into this world's collective psyche. Let's compare Harry Potter to a similar, yet arguably considerably better written piece of media, The Owl House. I love The Owl House so much. It's gotta be one of my favorite recent cartoons. And it's got a lot of similarities to Harry Potter. There's a witch school, there's a human world and a magic world, there's a big bad who has to be stopped by a teenage protagonist. Hell, the coven system is even kinda similar to Hogwarts houses. However, I don't think The Owl House will become a sandbox. Yes, the premise has some similarities to Harry Potter, but it is so much better written. Even compared to other modern cartoons, The Owl House moves extremely fast. Within the first 5 episodes, you've got all the plots for season 1 brewing. It's just an insanely cleanly written show. Unfortunately, this means it's probably not going to be a super long-lasting fandom. The fandom is kinda active right now, cause it just ended a few months ago. But in a little bit, once Mooring Mark stops posting daily comics and people get tired of there not being any official content, it's gonna peter out. I'm guessing The Owl House will have a similar fandom longevity to something like Gravity Falls. Widely beloved, frequently rewatched by a bunch of fans, but once the initial hype dies down, pretty barren on the fan content front. So, Harry Potter's plot holes and less than stellar writing open this world up for people to create a world of their own. The characters are not the absolute strongest, so that opens people up to create their own interpretations. When I was into Harry Potter, I was a little young to be creating fan content myself, but the stuff I remember liking the most was Neil Cicierega's Potter Puppet Pals and Star Kids: A Very Potter Musical, neither of which arguably has much to do with the actual books themselves. And that's the mark of a plot hole sandbox, something that drives the fans to create something greater than the work itself. Now, of course, I can't talk about plot hole sandboxes without talking about the one that I've been in for the last decade. Listen, I love Homestuck. I've been in this fandom since I was 15 years old. It's the reason why I'm a musical theater composer and a voice actor and why I have a girlfriend, but it's an absolute fucking mess. And that is exactly why it's given me enough material to be engaged for a whole decade. There are no cleanly tied narrative bows in Homestuck. Yes, the main plot does get finished in the end, as long as you disregard the epilogues, but it still leaves you with a ton of questions and wanting more. There are so many subsects of unfinished lore that there's a little something for everyone to obsess over. There's the mechanics of Suburb, for one. What the fuck is up with the mechanics of Suburb? What do class specs even mean in the greater purpose of Suburb? There are people who write entire essays about this stuff. People who have blogs dedicated to helping people find their class spec and how they would fit into the mechanics of Suburb. That's not my niche. All the technical stuff kinda hurts my brain, and the extended Zodiac quiz was enough for me to find my own class spec. For the fans who want to explore more character depth, we've got all the different individual character subgroup fandoms. There are so many characters in this damn comic that you basically have to choose a group of them and make that your home. And by a specific group, I'm not meaning the beta kids or beta trolls, no, I'm meaning the really obscure ones. Mine is the Ancestors. And also the Friend Sim trolls, but they kind of go hand in hand. I latched onto both of them for similar reasons. Alternia is a fascinating world that Hussey started to create, but it's incomplete. Like, how does Ascension work? Hussey doesn't even give us a glimpse of life out in space. What's up with the troll reproduction? The whole fornicating in a bucket thing was definitely because Hussey thought it was weird and gross, and not because he actually thought it through. And diving into my favorite bits of unfinished lore, There were 2 major rebellions on Alternia and a 3rd one brewing in Hiveswap, yet we don't see, like, any of it. The comic gives you the equivalent of a mythological telling of the Signless's story. It's captivating and totally unfinished. Somehow, it's so captivating that there have always been a fairly significant number of Ancestor fans in this fandom. This tiny group of characters who don't speak, barring Mindfang, and who exist for maybe 1% of the comic's entire length, have inspired so much fan work. They inspired a full-length musical. It's my musical. Go watch it. Link up here. And, well, after years in one tiny subset of the fandom, you're bound to get bored of that subset, right? Well, the thing with Homestuck is there's so many subsets that you're basically never gonna run out. After a while, you might stop being a fan of the comic itself because it's done all it can for you. But you're still in the fandom just for the fan lore and the fan projects. Tired of the Homestuck characters, but you still love the MISPA comic format? Well, good news, there's thousands of fan ventures out there, some of which have branched out to their own sub-fandoms and sets of lore. Like the concept of PesterQuest, but disappointed by the execution, there are several high-quality visual novels in the style of Friendsim and PesterQuest that are available to download for free. Whoever said perpetual motion machines aren't real was totally lying, because that's what the Homestuck fandom is. There hasn't been any official content since 2020, but the fandom just keeps on running and creating its own fuel ad infinitum. Once you're in deep, you can't leave. Believe me, I've tried. If you think this is a cry for help, yes, it is. So, you might ask, what the fuck do rabid fandoms have to do with Alanis Morissette's supposed former infatuation junkie? Well, I'm convinced that the reason this album has taken up so much of my brain space over the last decade is it's the music equivalent to a plot hole sandbox. No, there can't really be any plot holes in a non-narrative album, but music, and especially pop and rock music, has rules. And this album breaks so many of them. Let's start with song form. Think of your favorite song, or just the catchiest song you heard on Spotify last week. It's probably in verse-chorus form. You've got your verse, then probably a pre-chorus, which will lead you into your chorus. That's got that catchiest bit that's gonna get stuck in your head. Then that'll repeat. You'll probably have a bridge, and then you'll have one more chorus. Yes, this format can vary. No song form is completely set in stone, but I can guarantee most songs you know are some variation of verse-chorus form. Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie has a whopping 4 songs that don't follow verse-chorus form. 4! That's a quarter of the album. And of those 4 songs, half of them are strophic. When was the last time you heard a strophic song that wasn't classical? For those of you not familiar with song structure terminology, strophic means that there is just one repeating section in the song. You hear the same melody and chord progression for the duration of the song. There are 2 dangers for a song like that. For one, depending on how many verses you have, your listener could get bored hearing the same thing over and over with no breaks. For 2, it's probably not going to sell as well. If you're writing a song with the purpose of getting listens, or in the case of 1998, radio plays, you need a song with a strong hook. A strophic song can have a good hook, but it's much harder to pull that off than it is to pull off a catchy chorus. Now, yes, the album does have 13 songs that follow standard verse-chorus structure, but a good handful of them have something that you could classify as extremely weird. Take I Was Hoping, for example. The verses are an absolute lyric deluge, and sound like they could almost be improvisatory. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they were written. She wrote a chord progression, a rough melody, and 3 massive paragraphs with no intent put into rhyme scheme or scansion. She got in front of the mic and just sang the paragraphs, and then put some emphasis on the end of the phrases with a little turnaround. But most of the time, the words at the end of the phrase don't even make sense scansion-wise. It is a really weird one. Or we could look at Baba. Seems pretty standard at first glance, sounds grungy, feels like something you'd expect from 90s Alanis Morissette. But listen to this. That's Indian Carnatic music. That is heavily inspired by Indian Carnatic music, and it's just sort of stuck in there instead of a bridge. It fits the song perfectly. The song is about spiritual gurus who exist only to profit off tourists visiting India, but it's still super unexpected. And then it's followed up by her wailing Ave Maria repeatedly, a continuation of her decades-long reconstruction of her Catholic upbringing. Now I want to narrow in on the song that I think does the most along the lines of breaking rules to build engagement. I want to talk about one of the most unusual songs in the album and one of my long-term favorites, The Couch. This is one of those strophic songs I mentioned earlier. The same melody, same chord progression, 7 times in a row. Thing is, the sameness of the form actually serves to help the song, because it's a saga song. The Couch tells the story of a therapy session, or a father and daughter recounting the father's therapy session. Honestly, it's not the clearest perspective, and it kind of jumps around a bunch, but I'd say that actually serves the song's intrigue. When it comes to rhyme scheme, or any sort of intentional text setting, there is none. If a rhyme sounds like it's starting to form, it's a happy accident. Like I was hoping, and so many of the supposed Former Infatuation Junkie songs, The Couch is a stream of consciousness. Again, this is not a song that was written to get stuck in your head with a catchy hook. There's barely anything to ground you in the song, let alone leave you singing it. You're being told a story to music. And because of the fucked up scansion, which I mentioned plenty in my Such Pretty Forks in the Road video essay, you're gonna miss most of that story on your first listen. Or your fourth listen. Or really, until you have those lyrics in front of you. So the song breaks all the rules to tell you a story that you can barely understand with an unclear perspective? Sounds terrible, right? Except that's the thing. In being objectively incorrect, The Couch becomes incredibly intriguing. I'm gonna try to limit the amount of sound clips that I use in this video because I don't want to get demonetized like last time, so I'm just gonna read you the first verse.
You haven't seen your father in such a long time. He died in the arms of his lover. How dare he? Your mother never left the house. She never married anyone else. You took it upon yourself to console her.
You're thrown right into this man's childhood trauma, all while you're hearing these haunting chords with a tremolo effect, which I only just found out this is called a tremolo. Tremolo means something completely different in live instruments, but in this context, it means that the sound is being panned in time between left and right, which makes it feel like the sound is being threaded through your head. I don't know if this is intentional, but I wonder if this threading effect is supposed to be reminiscent of EMDR therapy. Was EMDR therapy common in the 90s? But like I was saying, you're getting a story put to music, and once you catch a glimpse of that story, you're intrigued. You want to grab your CD case and take out that little lyric booklet to make sure you're getting the full picture. Despite The Couch not having a catchy chorus, it still has a pretty memorable strophic verse, which means it's bound to get caught in your head at some point. And then you're going to be thinking about the story again. This song is not for the kind of person who just likes music as background sound, or who just wants something to dance to. Really, most of supposed Former Infatuation Junkie isn't meant for that. And there is nothing wrong with that kind of music. Bops and bangers and background music, they all have a purpose in the music world. But supposed Former Infatuation Junkie is meant for the kind of listener who wants to think, who wants to dig deep. In the same way that supposed Former Infatuation Junkie attracts fans that think deeply about their music, media like Homestuck attracts fans who like to think about wild and complex plot and far too many characters and want to fill in the gaps themselves. I guess the whole point of this is to say that if you want to create a piece of really well-written media, whether that be a TV show or an album or a novel, you're gonna have people who like it. You're gonna have people who love it. You might have people who think about it years down the line because it left such a mark on them. But for the majority of people, they're gonna enjoy it. But if you want to write the kind of media that consumes people, something that attracts the kind of person that can think about something every waking hour and who is able to build upon it and create something that is far greater than the work itself and do that for years and years, you have to write a sandbox. You can't be afraid to take risks, even if those risks mean breaking every rule about proper form and function that has been drilled in your head since childhood. Just please don't break the rules by writing something that's deeply hurtful and offensive. And for all of you who are still into Harry Potter, who played the Hogwarts Legacy blood libel simulator, just shame on you. Listen, I get it's hard to give up a childhood love, and I'm not gonna judge you for rereading the books or rewatching the movies for a throwback, but it literally saves you money to not buy a $60 anti-Semitic game. And it's literally the easiest thing you can do to show your trans and Jewish friends you care about them. But yeah, that's all I gotta say on sandboxes for now. What do you guys think? What's your favorite piece of media that keeps you coming back, even if it's not perfectly crafted? Thank you all so much for sticking around to the end. This video essay has been bouncing around my head for the last year, and I'm so glad to finally get it out. Huge thanks to my patrons, Jonaya Riley, Tev Linsey, Stinky, Rosalie Ross, and Jeremy M. If you're looking for some new media with interesting lore to get into, you should check out my new musical Maka. A rating of the show is available on my Patreon for only $1. But if you don't want to spend any money, we're also on Instagram, TikTok, and a few of the songs are on my channel below. Also, make sure to check out my social media in the links below, and make sure to join my Discord if you want updates on the channel, or if you just want to hang out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.